Okay, we're in Colossians. We're going to look at the last two chapters. I combined them because in all of Paul's letters, he presents his feelings and gratitude to the people he's writing to. And then, as he's built them up, told them what a great job they're doing, then he says, now we have some problems. Now, the reason why letters were written was because there were problems. They would not have to have been written if there weren't problems then or coming. It's not as problems is, we have to look at it more than not if they come, but when. And we need to prepare to face the backlash. And many times we're going to face the consequences of somebody else's choice to sin. But many of people around us have had to do the same thing with us being around. We all have free choice. God does not take that away from anybody. And so how do we react? That's why these letters were written. And there were hundreds of letters that we find out about throughout history. We've got 27 that we know of. Some of those, it's wondering if, since they were just one pages and they all looked the same, and there was no space between have you ever seen the original manuscripts? Especially in the Greek? Paper was scarce and very expensive, and so was ink. And not everybody knew how to write the letters effectively, so many times you had to hire somebody. Paul had that kind of education, but he didn't have the hands for it, and I'm starting to feel that coming on. He had an amanuensis, and that sounds painful, doesn't it? Till you realize what an amanuensis is. It's a secretary that you dictate to, and they write it down for you. He wrote many letters he dictated. And it might be that they didn't trust him in the prison. The reason why he was there was spreading this false doctrine around in their minds. They're not going to give him paper and pen and let him write. So a lot of times it would be some people that he would entrust the information to, and he would slyly get a letter out. That is a lot of the reason why I believe the book of Revelation is symbolic. So that the censors who know it's coming from John, it's going to Christians, and it's going to back up the reason why he's already on exile, they would read it through and say, this is a bunch of hogwash, and just send it on. And that's how that letter got through the censors. And there were a lot of tricks they had to play to be sly to get these things out. But a lot of times they didn't get past the censors, and the censors destroyed them. So we just have to trust and have our faith in the fact that God guided the guys who put this together over a period of 400 years. There was what we called a New Testament until almost the 5th century. And it was not all put together without argument and dissension and division and lines drawn in the sand as to which ones were inspired and which ones were not. So that is a big chance of faith that we take, that the ones we have are the ones we need. But that comes out in a lot of Paul's letters, and it will come out at the end of this one. That there were many that he wrote that we don't have. So our faith has to be that what we have is what we need. And that's hard to do, and Satan is a master at planting that distortion and our distraction in our minds, worrying about, rather than just following the advice and putting it into practice and using it. That's how this false teaching that he's combating in Colossians snuck into the area. But it was also nice that they had these letters, not just from Paul, but from a couple of the other apostles that we know. They had letters going around the region. And there were others that weren't necessarily designated apostles, but who knew the system, understood, who were inspiring and edifying the Christians who wrote and encouraged them as well. So here we're looking what Paul then will say, here's the problem. And then he finishes by giving his confidence and knowing that they're going to do the right thing. That's where we are in Colossians 3 and 4. Is, okay, now that we know all this, Jesus is one-stop shopping. He's all you need. God does not have many generals and lieutenants out there trying to give you all the information that you need. Jesus is one-stop shopping. Now, we have to bring people to Jesus. If we're not careful, we bring him basically to church, the way we practice certain things, and we think that's evangelism. But the people don't know. They know our system, they know our practices, but they don't know Jesus. We need to convert them to Jesus. He brings them into his church, and then we continue to grow from there, right up to the point of our death. They say the day a tree stops growing is the day it dies. It's always constantly growing. And Christian disciples need to be the same way. There's never a point where we've made it, we got it, we sit back on our haunches. Satan likes to tell us, though, you have to take a break. You've gotten it. Now take your time to teach him this part, And, he's a master at deception. If we listen to him, we're going to think that our practices and traditions are doctrines. Jesus only gave his disciples one command. You love one another the way I have loved you. So it's a good sentiment, a good thought. Leads right into chapters 3 and 4, where we take time to be holy. There is another song in the book that came to mind while I was looking through here. 392. Just wondering if, being in different places, you never know which groups know these songs or whatever, so I just bring them to your attention. But it's going to come up in what Paul says here and what we need to look at. So keep your finger in place here and follow along in Colossians chapter 3 with me. We left off about midway down on the first side of the handout there. Since you've been raised with Christ, set your heart on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Seated always had the symbolic meaning that everything that needed to be done was done. You did your work, and then you sat down. And so in the book of Revelation, when Jesus came here, he did everything that had to be done. He suffered to pay the penalty for sin that we owed. He rose from the dead. He got his corps of generals in place to go out and let the rest of the world know. And then he went, ascended into heaven, and sat down at the right hand of God. It's done. Everything that needs to be done is done. But humans can't handle that, can they? We always think there's a way to improve it and to make it up. We can't let everybody get to heaven. It'd be too crowded. So they make it hard. Not intentionally, but many times we are harsher with God's laws and rules than he is with his own. David got away with 2 murder sentences. And God said he was the man after my own heart. It doesn't sound like a God that's waiting to zap you and look for you to mess up so that he can push you aside because there's limited space in heaven. There is unlimited space in heaven. We don't need to keep people at bay and away. Our job is to go out and bring them in. That's our job. And like the parable Jesus taught about the guy who went out and sowed his seed, did he discriminate to where he placed that seed? He threw it everywhere, and he let the soil decide. And that's how we have to live. And so he said that's where we set our minds. We set them on where Jesus is, because that is the goal, isn't it? That is what we need to be aiming for. Set your mind on what the final conclusion is. Usually then, hopefully, your life will follow suit. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. You died to sin. They were buried with Jesus in the tomb. But when Jesus came back from the dead, your sins stayed dead. Don't live like a zombie. You've died to sin. Get on to something else. Your life is now hidden with Christ in God. And that word for hidden is actually put under guard and under protection. Jesus could have called 12,000 angels to rescue him at the last moment. He didn't need 12,000 though, did he? He didn't even need one. But he just showed, how enormously stacked against Satan things are, and we just forget it. We don't realize it. We're all in the same boat. That's why we all need the faith to trust in him. And life is an experiment. It's a marathon.
And we should thank him for not calling the angels to save him, because we'd still be in trouble.
Sure. And Jesus told the disciples that. He said, you don't realize the scriptures say that the Messiah has to die? There has to be a price paid for sin. So God came, paid the price to himself. Didn't pay off Satan. He didn't pay off you. He paid off himself so that you could live. And if he wants everyone to be saved, he's going to make it as easy as he possibly can. But we as humans, and you had that in one of the movies there, Tom Hanks played a baseball manager, and it was during World War II when all these girls played professional baseball, and they could have played professional with the guys, a lot of them. But one of them was frustrated with everything and started crying. And now we have a known passage from a movie that everybody recites. There's no crying in baseball. and the main character too, her husband was coming back injured from the war, and she was going to go and be with family and not play ball anymore. And he was trying to talk her out of it. She said, no, it's just too hard. She said, yes, of course it's hard. That's what makes it good. No. Having fun participating is what makes it good. At least for me it did. And when people took it too seriously, I went and tried to find another set of guys to play with, because life is not determined by the outcome of a game. And yet a lot of people in our culture believe that way, don't they? You have to make it hard to be good. God made it easy. And we can't be trampled on with this idea. All right. Our life now is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will appear with him in glory. Yeah. So that's what we're awaiting. We're waiting for Jesus to return to take us home. Therefore, he says in verse 5, literally in the Greek, I'm going to read it as the Greek literally says it. Murder, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature. And then he's going to list some very disgusting things, but this isn't the full list. It's just this kind of thing where the Hebrews saw three different things with sin. One, it was called transgression, which means it was illegal. It's like going 60 out here when it's posted at 55. A lot of people don't realize that, though, do they? They do it anyway. Actually, when they see 55, they really actually in their mind says 70. Don't they? Yeah. Okay. We know it's wrong. We do it anyway. Okay. That was one type of sin. Another type of sin was that it was damaging. It's a health problem that we have. Sin damaged our body, and now that we don't have connection to the tree of life, people started, things aren't getting better, are they? I look in the mirror every day and wonder who that guy is. Yeah, it's not getting better. We're going to a stage of decay. But in Christ, inwardly, Paul says, we're being renewed day by day. The other one is the word used, translated is iniquity. Iniquity is knowing it's wrong. You're going to do it anyway, but you're also going to do it to the extreme to where when you're done, you're all full of it, and you've satiated yourself with it and pleased every ounce of yourself with it. Now in David's psalm, which was a prayer of forgiveness after his adultery with Bathsheba, he used all three of those. And knowingly, he did not sin against Uriah the Hittite, her husband. He did not say he sinned against Bathsheba, even though both of those things were true. He said, no, I've sinned against you. Give me a new heart. Change this one. It's damaged. I need a new one. That's what God is looking for. That's the forgiveness that he always provides. But you have to put your sin to death. And then he lists these things. Sexual immorality. King James will say fornication. Okay, that the sexual pleasure is one of very selfishness, where you use another person for your own pleasure. And using it away from the purpose for which God created it is a sin. Otherwise, he declared it in the garden. He declared that it was very good. There is a branch of Christianity who follows one of their ancient theologians who had a problem in this area. What brought him to Christ was the dirtiness he had with his immoral lifestyle. But he is responsible for teaching a doctrine still to this day, where the original sin in the Garden of Eden is that Adam and Eve had sex. God told them to be fruitful and multiply, and there's only one way to do that. Now, would he tell them to do something that's sinful? But even in this group, they require you to be forgiven of that. Sex is only for procreation. But there was an element of lust to it, and that, in their teachings, is a mortal sin. You have to get constant confession for it. Then, of course, you have to go to one of their religious specialists, and he won't do it unless you've been attending his group. And then, there go the rules. There goes those mountains of rules that we can't do, that we think we need to do. But God would not tell us to do something that's immoral or wrong. Using it out of that purpose of that marriage commitment now places it in the realm of fornication. Paul says those are the things we have to murder. The selfishness, the impurity. Impure, they'll say uncleanness. That was a metallurgist term. When he's melting out his metal, we don't let any impurities get involved in that. Otherwise, it messes up the durability and the quality of the metal. One of the purposes of a metallurgist was making sure it was not mixed with anything else. Unless you wanted to strengthen it, then you included an alloy, like steel has as an alloy. But the idea of us being unmixed is an interesting concept. Impure means you've mixed your spiritual life with God with idolatry. You've brought in things of a human nature. You brought them into the church. And Satan doesn't mind if you go to church. He just doesn't want you to focus on what you're supposed to focus on. You want to be focused, according to Satan, you want to be focused on how things are done and what everybody else is doing or not doing, so that you can point the fingers. And actually, we're all here because we all have problems we need to correct. That is why we come together. And we're not here to make God happy. We're here to encourage one another to be better in our service for God. And that's what makes him happy. See, sometimes we get focused on the wrong thing, and we get mixed with the world. So we need to be unmixed. Lust is just that desire to do what you want. And in our country, our main philosophy in our country tends to caused this to happen. It's a free country. I can do anything I want. Well, you can try that, but our jails are full of people, and that didn't work for it. So, evil desires. Now, the word in the King James language is concupiscence. We don't use that word every day, do we? Do you tell your neighbor that the person on the other side of their house was guilty of concupiscence? That is a Latin term that would cover the word iniquity. You're going to do it because you want the pleasure related to it, and that's your benefit, and that's why you do it. I don't know how many times we've seen on the movies or read in books, one of the spouses will have an affair with somebody else, and then when found out, said, well, it really didn't mean anything. It was just sex. Okay, that's the idea of concupiscence. You're going to do it for the pleasure you derive from it. And it's strange that Paul would actually, in front of that word, put the word evil. Because that just doubled down on the insaneness of it all. And greed, which he says is idolatry. Now, greed could be the whole title of all those different things. But it's just the idea of covetousness. Go back to Romans chapter 7, and Paul will say it's that coveting, that greed. It gets me every time. You see somebody else who's better off, and yet you know their lifestyle is evil, it'll drive you nuts. Yeah, we're going through that personally after the storm. Yeah, and it'll drive you crazy, but you can't get involved in it. That is not what we were created for. So we have to put all these things to death. We have to murder them. And it says all that whole list is idolatry. Idolatry is self-worship. You're focused on yourself and pleasure and how good it will feel. You're not necessarily focused on anybody else. Definitely not God. Do we remember, though, that when we put on Christ in baptism, he goes everywhere with us? Paul will remind the Corinthians. He still calls them brothers and sisters. They're still Christians, but they're still trying to get rid of this evil, immoral lifestyle they were raised in. And he tells them, your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. You're dragging God through these sins. He's not going to be pleased with it. So it says in verse 6 then, because of these, the wrath of God is coming. So the promise made concerning idolaters, you don't want to face God in his wrath. Wrath is not just being angry. It's being angry to the point you're totally, completely filled up with the anger and you act upon it. Fortunately, God's wrath has not really been shown to us in any human effort throughout history yet. That comes on the last day. He's still left it open for anybody who wants to come to him. And so that is, knowing that time is coming, Paul says, that is why we get busy and go out and do these things. All right. You used to walk in these things, Paul says, in these ways, in verse 7. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived. None of us are innocent of that. We might not have done the nastiest, evilest sin, but we all have done some, and that is enough wages for death. So we're all guilty. There is no one in the congregation who can be the police force to point out everybody else's faults. Yet Paul has to deal with that even in Romans. Who are you to judge another man's servant? You stand and fall before the very same master. So you'd better let the master do his job. I watched a guy. It was very sad to see. He actually mentored me in ministry. All my years growing up through teenage years, he was our minister. But he got involved in a fight in the area where we were, and it drove him insane. He tried to single-handedly stave off anybody listening to this guy, and in the course of doing so, drove off a lot of other people who noticed, okay, I come out of the world that's fighting. I'm not coming into another group that's fighting. Forget this. So we have to be careful that what we're fighting for is worth fighting for. And sometimes, like in the case where I found myself now, it ain't my fight. There's nothing I can do about it. I've done everything I could. Got to hand it off to somebody who's better at it. I wonder how God feels sometimes when we try to do his job. So we're all guilty of these things here. So Paul says we have to get rid of them. He says, we used to live that way, verse 8, but now you must rid yourselves. And that word for rid doesn't mean just push it aside. That's what happened to the Israelites when they went into the land of Canaan. God says, move these people out. All they did was push them back far enough to where they got comfortable, and then they settled in and started rebuilding their own things. And because they didn't push these other people out, those influences from Satan kept being hurled at them over the fences. They made business alliances. They intermarried. And they went right back to where they were before. So that's why we have to push them out of our life. We can't just push them back. So now we need to rid ourselves of all these things. And Paul will usually use the word of clothing to give a visual of what's going on. Take these off. Think about you taking your coat off and hanging it up and then walking away. And then later he's going to say, now put these things on. So here's your new shirt, your new pants for today. Clothing. Throw it away. It's damaged. It's stained. You can't wash it clean. Jesus has done that, so give it to him. And let him put a new robe on you that's clean and white. That's all the symbolism in the book of Revelation too. But he says we must unclothe ourselves of these. Anger, you mean we can't be mad? Doesn't it make you mad when he says things that we don't think are that bad? You can't get angry? Okay. Try to keep that anger out of your mind because it produces these next things. Rage. You start losing it mentally and you drive people away. Malice. You purposefully want that other person to fail. So you do everything you can in your power to mess them up. That's malice. We're supposed to be doing the opposite. We're supposed to be bringing them into Christ. But if we're acting like everybody else, getting mad, they won't listen to us, you write them off. They forced people out of their assemblies. And God says, wait a second. I wanted them to come to me. You were to be the agent to do that. I set you as a watchman, Ezekiel. Not to drive people away, but to warn them so that they'll come back. No different in being fishers of men. We can't drive people away. You don't know that God sent them to you or us to bring them to him. So you have to be living it out in such a way that you make it attractive. People come. All right, the malice, the slander, the filthy language from your lips. He's writing this to Christians, okay? He's not writing this letter to non-Christians. They were still working on it. All right. Do not lie to each other. The worst lie you tell is the one you tell to yourself. Sometimes you think, you're right. Saul of Tarsus did. He thought it was right to kill people who were not following the right religious rules. And if we're not careful, we can murder them too. Because murder doesn't mean just to end their physical life. Murder was also a word that God used for people who kept other people from coming to him. You've killed them spiritually. That is a form of murder. Okay. So don't lie to each other. We don't decide who's in and who's out. And sometimes most of the lies we tell, maybe I should just think of myself here, they're meant to keep me from being embarrassed or found guilty of doing something wrong. So don't lie to each other. Since you've unclothed your old self with its practices, and you've reclothed your new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge of the image of its creator. See, the false teaching Paul is combating here was all about your mind and keeping everything in place and keeping it well ordered and keeping it in a nice box, so that a little box on the shelf, so that if people ask you a question, oh yeah, that's this subject here, and you pull that down and then you just regurgitate whatever somebody told you about it. Put it back in place. Now, if someone tells you that's not correct, and you have to change the way you're thinking, that's where they start getting angry with you. And there goes the anger and the rage and all these other things that we don't think are that bad. And we divide over issues that God didn't think were even important enough to talk about. And we think that we're doing God's will. We have to constantly get back. And we need to know that we are the image of the Creator. God created man in whose image? What kind of an image does God have? Does he have a nose? Is it big like mine? Does he really have hands? Or is that a teaching we have about God so that we can kind of get a mental picture of what he's like? Does he have to sit down because he gets tired? So he sits on a throne?
Because he made Christ.
Okay. He came and showed us what we were supposed to be like, and that was Jesus. Okay. That should be enough. But we have to embellish, don't it? What image does God have? Well, it's not a physical one, because our eyes can't detect him unless he does something miraculous to where we can see it. Same thing with angels. They're here, they're around us all the time, but our eyes are not designed to detect them. Every once in a while they were, and the people got shocked a lot. Their favorite saying, whenever they saw somebody, don't be afraid. I come to bring you good news. Yeah, and they were here and then gone. What image does God have? We were created in his image, and it's going to be shown in how we live. And that word for image is the word icon, literally. I-C-O-N is how it's transliterated into English. We are God's icon. In the digital age, we know what icons are, right? They're pictures that present an idea of what you're trying to get across. We have memes now, we have emojis. So when everybody's happy, you see these pictures of people celebrating. When people are sad, you see someone moping or crying, and those are icons. We were created to grow in our knowledge into the icon of God. What does God look at? Or what does he look like? People get their idea of God from watching his icons. That's us. We are to present God to the world. If we're not building a relationship with him, what kind of an icon are we showing them? That's why we have to keep working at it, and why it never ends. Because certain icons will draw attention from certain different people. You never know which one is going to work. And just because that one worked with some, doesn't mean it's going to work with all. This is why Paul approached every situation with every person differently, and so did Jesus. He did not he treated Nicodemus very harshly, basically, because Nicodemus should have known better. But the woman at the well, he just sat down and just talked about her life. See, different. He tailor-made it for each person. And we need to do the same thing. And that is how we can be an icon for God. Is it going to be an icon? Think of the store shelves when you go to buy something. And you have, Mike, you got so many different things to choose from. All kinds of tomato soup. All kinds of ramen noodles. And it's usually how they package it that will allow us to take it, or how they price it. Now, what kind of a choice do we give of people from the kind of God that we portray in our life? Is it a God that they are interested in and will buy? Is it a God that draws their attention? Is it worth the price being paid? We are his icons. Therefore, this song I had you mark here, number 392. You all know this one? Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. All his wonderful passion and purity. May his spirit divine all my being refine. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in me. Well, that's a dangerous statement to make. But David did it. He says, search my heart and tell me what's wrong with it. Ooh. That's one of the most dangerous prayers you can pray. When your burden is heavy and hard to bear, when your neighbors refuse all your load to share, when you're feeling so blue, don't know just what to do, let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. Okay, a lot of things, there's nothing you can do about it. But there is someone who can benefit from your being an icon. When somebody has been so unkind to you, some words spoken that pierces you through and through, think how he was beguiled, spat upon, and reviled. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. We retaliate, we act like them. Whose icon are we showing them? The deceiver, Shaitan. From the dawn of the morning to the close of day, an example in deeds, in all you say. This goes back to your sermon last week, Mike. Appreciated that very much. Awesome message. Everything you do, lay your gifts at his feet. Ever strive to be sweet. Let the beauty of Jesus be seen in you. That's how we can be his icon. We are being renewed in our knowledge of how to be his icon. So it fits with other passages that Paul has written there. I list those for you. Romans 12, Ephesians 4, Philippians 4. Excuse me. But Paul says we take off the old self that pushed people away. Reclothe, put on the coat that attracts people to God. It's being renewed in the image. Here, there are no social barriers in Christ. If we have social barriers in our churches, it's because we have brought them in and kept them and have not taken them off. Here, there's no Greek or Jew. So one of the barriers he breaks down, nationality. Everybody wants to be known from where they came. Well, if where you came from was so good, why are you here? Why didn't you stay? Okay, nationality, Greek or Jew, doesn't matter on your birth. Circumcised or uncircumcised, religious practices are not the key. They're not the sign. The world will know you're my disciples because of the love you have for one another, not because of how you worship on Sunday. Religious practices we use to hinder people coming. Barbarian and Scythian. You ever hear those terms? Every culture looks at the world of people through the lens of two eyes. In America, we're Americans or we're foreigners, aren't we? To the British, you're English or you're immigrant. And it's always a derogatory term for the other people.
To The Amish were English.
Yes. And to the Jews, you were either Jew or Gentile. To the Greeks, you were a Greek or a barbarian. To the Romans, you were a Roman or you were less than dirt on the earth. You were Scythian. So your cultural status does not matter. You can be slave or free. So your social status does not matter. One he leaves off of here that he has in Galatians chapter 3, male or female. Gender. Christ breaks down all barriers. We are all one in him. And if we are in him, we are brothers and sisters. It's not based on what we do. It's not based on where we go. It's not based on how we interpret. It's all based on being in Christ and being one in him. This was all accomplished. You can read Romans 3, Ephesians 2. Add in there Galatians chapter 3, verses 26 through 29. Because Paul has a bunch of lists that show you that God's message is open to everybody. So rather than dividing off and being the smartest, heaven is not going to be populated by the best obeyers as if there was a competition for who did the best. Jesus is all, and he is in all. And if our thinking isn't that way, we're not a proper icon for God. And Paul will go on with some more practical examples of how to live it out every day. And these are in the next section. You can read ahead. I'll let you go ahead if you want to do that for homework. But next week we'll pick up there from where every day we worship God in some way. And that's what God is looking for. All right.